course, they didn't want that to happen. So Senate Democrats filibustered him 7 separate times in 2003. He was one of the many victims of this norm-shattering, precedent-breaking behavior. A few years later, colleagues such as Senator Biden, Durbin, Leahy, Obama, and Schumer tried to filibuster Justice Alito's nomination to the Supreme Court. Fortunately, that was not successful. But then something really funny happened. Something really funny happened. All of a sudden, it was a new president, President Obama. Suddenly, a Democratic president was making judicial nominations. Well, imagine what happened then. Suddenly, Senate Democrats became very allergic to experiencing the effects of what they had started. In effect, the effects of their own playbook. They had no patience to taste their own medicine. None whatsoever. Colleagues did not appreciate being held to the standards they had just created a few years before. The shoe was on the other foot. Well, we all know what happened next. Another massive Senate-shaking escalation by Senate Democrats in 2013, the nuclear option. They broke the Senate rules to change the Senate rules so that a Democratic president would not have to play by the same rules they had invented shortly before. And with a 51-vote threshold in place, Democrats began confirming nominees without meaningful minority support. I said at the time, quoting myself, they'd regret it a lot sooner than they would think. Well, that regret began in 2016. In 2016, when Justice Scalia passed away, Senate Republicans had won our majority a year later. As I said then, when I recommended to all of you that we not fill that vacancy created in the middle of a presidential election year, that you'd have to go back to 1888 to find the last time a Senate of a different party from the president confirmed a Supreme Court nominee to a vacancy created during the presidential election year. In other words, not surprisingly, one party in control of the Senate was less inclined, and had been less inclined for a very long time, to confirm a Supreme Court nominee in the middle of a presidential election year. Entirely within the rights of the Senate to do that, because what had clearly developed over these years was the Senate viewed itself as a partner in the process. The president gets to nominate, but we get to decide whether to act on the nomination. Needless to say, after the unprecedented Senate-shaking steps that Senate Democrats had taken, the Republican Senate majority was not much inclined to depart from precedent and do President Obama that favor. Our decision in 2016 was fully in line with precedent, fully within the Constitution, and completely within the Senate rules. Now, I understand why they didn't like it. I wouldn't have either. Of course they didn't like it. But elections have consequences. And America had chosen a Republican Senate in 2014. But there's no parallel between actually breaking the rules, as the Democrats did in 2013, and merely applying the rules in ways that Democrats do not like. Big difference between breaking the rules and applying the rules in ways the Democrats did not like. If the Senate's going to function, we must maintain a distinction between when people break the rules and when they apply the rules in ways we may not like. When President Trump won in 2016, Senate Democrats took yet another reckless and unprecedented step. They mounted the first ever successful partisan filibuster of a Supreme Court nominee. That had not been done before. Tried it on Alito, it didn't succeed. Tried it on Gorsuch, and it did. So the message was, in effect, nobody who President Trump nominates is going to get 60 votes for the Supreme Court, no matter how qualified. Of course, speaking of qualifications, Justice Gorsuch's qualifications were simply beyond question. Someone who, frankly, has gone on to issue some rulings, by the way, that these guys over here like, which shows you predicting what a Supreme Court justice is going to rule on has been a hazardous guess.
We're going to take a quick commercial break. For those of you watching, some of you will see a quick 2-minute commercial break.
With nominees of Republican presidents have been consistent going back to John Paul Stevens. Every single one of them is going to be a disaster for women and minorities and all the rest, none of which, of course, ever materializes. So Republicans applied and extended what Senate Democrats had begun in 2013. They had left out the Supreme Court from being dealt with a simple majority. And so we decided, if we're going to return to where, by the way, the judicial calendar was by practice anyway just a few years ago, it was always dealt with a simple majority. The Thomas nomination proved it. That was the custom here, until our friends on the other side decided to start a new custom within the rules, but a new custom. So all, my friends, that's happened as a result of the threshold being lowered for the Supreme Court is we're back to where we were as recently as Clarence Thomas. The executive calendar is dealt with a simple majority. I think that's better for the country, and they'll benefit from that too at some point. When you have a president and a Senate of the same party, obviously this is going to happen quicker. That's the way it's always been. Whether the rule allowed a filibuster or not. So ironically, we're back to where we were. The entire executive calendar will now be dealt with as it was a few years ago, before all of this back and forth, with a simple majority. Well, obviously, Justice Gorsuch was confirmed on a bipartisan basis once the executive calendar was returned finally to a simple majority. And then Justice Kavanaugh. Most of us were here for that. Despite the horrific and embarrassing display that some of our Senate colleagues aided and abetted, we made it through that. So the good news is this: in about 72 hours, I anticipate we'll have a third new Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. In about 72 hours. I do not blame some of my Democratic colleagues who were not present for all of this. who wish the Senate would behave differently. But just know this. This is not spin, this is fact. Just know this. Every new escalation, every new step, every new shattered precedent, every one of them was initiated over there. No exceptions. Every one of them. And it all happened over the strenuous objection of Republicans who tried in each instance to stop Democrats from trading away long-term Senate norms for short-term political wins. 17 years ago, colleagues, 17 years ago, Democrats were boasting to newspapers about this brand new campaign to politicize judicial confirmations. They thought it was a great idea. Bragged about it. One of my colleagues called himself the king of the filibuster and proudly wanted to own it. Well, sooner or later, the shoe is always on the other foot. So I hope our colleague from New York is happy with what he's built. I hope he's happy with where his ingenuity has gotten the Senate. Colleague, we've had this argument over and over for months, if not years. This is not really what we are here to debate today. We're here to actually consider an outstanding nominee whose qualifications nobody doubts, Judge Amy Coney Barrett. So, colleagues, let's get on with it. Let's do our job. Let's rediscover the rational treatment of nominations that the Democratic leader embarked on a deliberate project starting 20 years ago to erase. We will give this nominee the vote she deserves no later than Monday. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Democratic leader.
we have just heard a tit-for-tat, convoluted version of history that the majority leader uses to justify steering the Senate towards one of the lowest moments in its long history. Might does not make right. You did something wrong, so we can do something wrong is no justification when the rights of the American people are at stake. The Republican majority is steering the Senate towards one of the lowest moments in its long history. The Republican majority is on the precipice of making a colossal and historic mistake, and the damage it does to this chamber will be irrevocable. After thwarting the constitutional prerogative of a duly elected Democratic president to appoint a Supreme Court justice because it was an election year, the Republican majority is rushing to confirm a justice for a Republican president 1 week before Election Day. Consistency? Afraid not. You don't have the right to argue consistency when you're doing what you're doing now. 4 short years ago, all of our Republican friends argued that it was a principle. That was the word they used, principle, to let the American people have a voice in the selection of a Supreme Court justice because an election was 8 months away. Those same Republicans are preparing to confirm a justice with an election that is 8 days away. In the process, the majority has trampled over norms, rules, standards, honor, values, any of them that could possibly stand in its monomaniacal pursuit to put someone on the court who will take away the rights of so many Americans. The Republican majority, of course, ignored health guidelines to conduct in-person hearings in the middle of a pandemic after Republican members of the committee themselves had contracted COVID-19. It has broken long-standing Senate precedent. Never in the history of the Senate, despite any sophistic analyses of recent history, never has a Supreme Court nominee, a lifetime appointment, been considered so close to an election. The presiding officer of the Senate confirmed this yesterday in response to this senator's inquiry. Never in the history of the Senate has a Supreme Court nominee been confirmed after July of an election year. My friends, it is a hallmark of democracy that might does not make right. The Republican Senate is blatantly ignoring this principle. Here in Leader McConnell's Senate, the majority lives by the rules of because we can. They completely ignore the question of whether they should. A Supreme Court nominee will be confirmed on a party line vote after the rules were changed to allow it. Now it doesn't matter that an election is just a short time away. It's a complete contradiction of the supposed principle that same party so vehemently argued only 4 years ago. Again, 8 days before an election in which the American people will choose exactly who they want to pick Supreme Court justices for them. For the Republican leader to argue for consistency using his convoluted version of history is laughable. It is absurd. It is outrageous. It is a stain on this body and an indelible mark on this Senate majority. In short, the Senate Republican majority is conducting the most rushed, most partisan, and least legitimate process in the entire history of Supreme Court nominations. And Democrats will not lend an ounce of legitimacy to the process. Yesterday, the seats of the Democratic members of the judiciary remained vacant in that committee room. In their place were the reminders of what is ultimately at stake in this nomination, the fundamental rights of the American people. It's not Democrat or Republican or who did this when and who did that when. It is the rights of the American people, what America needs and what Judge Barrett has stood for on these issues in the past. That is ultimately what matters. On the seats of those Democratic members were photographs of Americans whose lives would be devastated if a Justice Barrett delivers the decisive vote to strike down the Affordable Care Act, ripping away health care from tens of millions of Americans and eliminating protections for more than 130 million Americans with pre-existing conditions. You could imagine, alongside their faces, the faces of women who cherish the right to make their own private medical decisions. The faces of LGBTQ Americans who want to marry who they love and not be fired for who they are. The faces of American workers who are breaking their backs to make ends meet and need their union to help them get a better wage. The faces of young people who know that the planet is in peril in their lifetimes. I hope that when Republican members of the Senate think about this nomination, they will think about those faces. what this nomination means to them, hundreds of millions of Americans who will lose rights and fundamental things they need to make their lives better because of this nomination. It's not about qualifications. It's about what the American people need and want, and will an unelected body take those rights away from them? So, I hope my colleagues will think about that. Take a moment. Take a moment to think about it. And then think about what it says about this sham of a process and the passion that we, on this side of the aisle, feel about protecting those people's rights, that we were forced to take the extraordinary step of refusing to participate in this process. Because while they may realize it or not, our Republican majority's monomaniacal drive to confirm this justice in the most hypocritical, the most inconsistent of circumstances will forever defile the Senate, and even more importantly, curtail the fundamental rights of the American people for generations to come. Democrats will play no part in that. I yield the floor. I hold the floor. I move to indefinitely postpone the Barrett nomination. I move to table the motion to indefinitely postpone the nomination, and I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There is. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Booker. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Braun. Mr. Brown. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Mr. Mr. Coons. Mr. Cornyn.
I just don't know what it means, and it was supposed to say, yeah. Thank you. Is that you? Oh, is it? Oh, it is. Hello.
Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Daines. Ms. Duckworth. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Ms. Ernst. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Gardner. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Ms. Hassan. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Heinrich. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Jones. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. King. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Langford. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mrs. Leffler. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Markey. Mr. McConnell. Ms. McSally. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Paul. Mr. Perdue. Mr. Peters. Mr. Portman. Mr. Reed. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Romney. Ms. Rosen. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sass. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Scott of Florida. Mr. Scott of South Carolina. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Sinema. Ms. Smith. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Warner. Ms. Warren. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Alexander, Barrasso, Braun, Burr, Capito, Cassidy, Collins, Cornyn, Cotton, Kramer, Crapo, Cruz, Daines, Enzi, Fisher, Gardner, Graham, Grassley, Hawley, Heidsmith, Inhofe, Kennedy, Lee, Loeffler, McConnell, McSally, Moran, Perdue, Portman, Roberts, Romney, Rounds, Sass, Scott of Florida, Scott of South Carolina, Shelby, Sullivan, Thune, Tillis, Toomey, Wicker, Young. Mr. Paul, aye. Mr. Risch, aye. Senators voting in the negative: Baldwin, Bennett, Blumenthal, Booker, Cantwell, Cardin, Carper, Casey, Coons, Cortez Masto, Duckworth, Durbin, Feinstein, Gillibrand, Hassan, Heinrich, Hirono, Kane, King, Klobuchar, Leahy, Manchin, Markey, Menendez, Merkley, Murphy, Murray, Peters, Reed, Rosen, Schatz, Shaheen, Smith, Stabenow, Tester, Warren, Whitehouse, Wyden. Mr. Blunt, aye. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Brown, no. Mrs. Blackburn, aye. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Mr. Warner, no. Mr. Rubio, aye. Mr. Udall, no. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Langford. Mr. Langford. Aye. Ms. Ernst. Ms. Ernst. Aye.
All right, you've been watching senators on the floor in the chamber there discuss a number of different things, including the pending vote on the full Senate floor of the confirmation of Judge Amy Coney Barrett. So we want to switch gears now and go out west, where Colorado is facing a number of really threatening, dangerous wildfires. The governor there, Jared Polis, gave an update earlier. Let's hear from him.
Fire, the East Troublesome fire, still of greatest concern to the most people, with active evacuations. We visited with some of the evacuees. Cameron Peak fire, also a number of areas of concern. And here we are in Boulder County, and the Calwood fire is behind us. This is obviously a safe place to be able to chat. We're joined by United States Congressman Joe Neguse from the 2nd Congressional District. Most of the fire land, and we're fortunate to have a United States Representative, Joe Neguse, who sits on the Natural Resources Committee. We're very involved with our federal partners. We were joined at different spots by members of the Forest Service. The Calwood fire had the highest percentage of private land as well, significant private land. But Cameron Peak and East Troublesome, over 90%. Federal land, public land, for both mitigation, resiliency. We rely on the relationship with our federal partners. We're also joined by our State Department of Natural Resources Executive Director Dan Gibbs, who will be available for questions as well. Cameron Peak at 206,977 acres. East Troublesome, 163 acres. Also, as you know, this year, Pine Gulch, 139,000 acres. So you might recall Pine Gulch at the time, seems like forever ago, I think it was about a month and a half ago, it became the largest fire in our state history. 2 fires have now eclipsed that size, Cameron Peak and East Troublesome. So the 3 largest fires in the history of Colorado have all been this year. And I'll get into those a little bit. Two main reasons that we're seeing this increased risk, and frankly, this is something that Colorado needs to plan for, because it isn't changing. One is the hotter, drier climate, the statewide drought, climate change, the changing conditions. 2 is just the increased population, utilization of land. Many of the fires were caused by human activity. Pending final investigation, the initial reports are East Troublesome was caused by human activity as well. There are some other fires in our state as well. Middle Fork fires, just over 20,000 acres, 1% contained. Williams Fork, 30% contained. Calwood, where we are here today, 10,073 acres, just over 2 dozen homes destroyed, 55% contained, but in our update they feel pretty good unless there's a change of wind and some hostile winds. There's a few areas they're watching, but most of the families have returned in Boulder County to their homes, and while some have lost everything, most were able to return safely. The ice fire fires, 596 acres and 30% contained. The biggest I think takeaway that for all of us in these fires is just a sense of great humility in the face of nature that we have with regard to these large events. When there's a unfavorable wind, there's very little that man or machine can do to stop a rapid spread of the virus. The resources we do have, and we were over at the Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport and some of the jet tanker, air tanker crews. They are deployed in a targeted way. We have great capabilities, usually used right around perimeter control to prevent spread to population centers, not necessarily for meaningful impact on the main body of the fire, but really effective in those targeted interventions to prevent spread across additional corridors that could lead to loss of property and loss of life. Wednesday night, and Wednesday was the day that the Troublesome fire just rapidly had its run. Wednesday, we activated the National Guard to assist with search and rescue operations, aerial surveillance in the Troublesome fire area. I think it's important to know that in these times that we really show this great Colorado spirit. I mean, it's communities coming together to help one another. In East Troublesome, we saw folks from the town manager to the emergency response people, most of whom were under evacuation orders themselves, still on the job working to help others, because that's what they do. At Rocky Mountain Metro Airport, they have 6 large air tankers. They turn them around very, very quickly, 15, 20 minutes, in and out, loaded up, fire retardant, back out. 39 helicopters are committed to specific fires. And the Cameron Peak fire, where we went to the Incident Command Center in Loveland today, we got a briefing on the potential risks of that fire as well. The next 24 to 36 hours, very touch and go with both East Troublesome, Cameron Peak, and our meteorological experts continue to expect precipitation late Saturday, Sunday. And look, in Colorado, we always like our snow in winter, but this year it's even more important that this is and we hope that this is towards the larger end of the projections, towards the longer end of the projections for snow, and that can make a definitive change in the fires. Before I go over to Congressman Neguse, I want to give a quick coronavirus update. First, you should know that all the evacuations are being done in as safe a way as possible with regard to the threat of coronavirus in mind. In the past, there are congregate settings and high school gyms, and these are images and practices that have occurred. This is being done in a much safer way, minimalizing the need for people to be in living together with beds side by side, utilization of hotel rooms, trying to give people that are evacuated, that don't have a safe place to go to, the opportunity to retain safe from coronavirus as well. It's the same with the fire camps. Again, traditionally, fire camps, often hundreds of people living together, shared, showers, dining hall, mess hall. That's not happening this fire. It's distributed. People are living in tents. They're in different areas. There's not one kitchen. There's not one mess hall or latrine, and it's been effective. There's been unfortunately firefighters that have come down and with symptoms, but it's been able to prevent the kind of larger outbreak that we know would occur if folks were living together in a congregate way. Today, Colorado had just over 1,350 new cases of coronavirus. We also had a new record for testing, 25,756 tests. So we're proud of that. If you do have symptoms, please get tested. Another way this relates to the air quality in the fires is for many people, if you're experiencing a cough, sore throat, respiratory issues, you may, in normal circumstances when we're not in a pandemic, just think that's the fires. It may very well be fires, but it also may be coronavirus. Please get tested if you're experiencing any respiratory symptoms, even if you think there will be fires. The state.
All right, apologize there for that audio issue, but you were just listening to the Colorado Governor Jared Polis give an update on the wildfires ravaging his state right now. He was also talking about the coronavirus measures there to contain the pandemic in Colorado as well. I'm Andrew Kraft. This is News Now from Fox, one of the digital journalists. I want to thank everyone for watching. It's been a heavy political day here on News Now. We've heard from the president twice, Vice President Pence, Senator Harris, and former Vice President Joe Biden, with just 11 days left until November 3rd for the general election. And we'll have live coverage for you on election night, probably all through the night here on News Now from Fox. We want to thank everyone for watching, wherever you're watching from. So let's go out now to something that happened earlier today in the Bay Area in California. California Governor Gavin Newsom gave an update on this, what it's called Project Home Key, which California officials, housing officials, take abandoned hotels, motels, other domiciles and convert them so the large homeless population there in the Golden State can have housing. So let's go to that right now.
Yeah, sure. All right, welcome. We're thrilled to have all of you here on Burnell Road to celebrate the opening of one of 3 of these emergency housing centers that we have for more than 300 homeless, formerly homeless individuals that we are moving into safety and into a brighter future. It has been said many times that the best solution for homelessness is housing. But here in the Bay Area, there have been fundamental challenges to the housing construction that we critically need. It costs too much and it takes too long. And while Sandy, who you're going to hear from in just a moment, and thousands of our brothers and sisters out on the streets have been suffering living outside, we're trying to build apartment buildings that take 4 or 5 years to build at an average cost of about $700,000 an apartment unit. And what we're learning is that with nearly 10,000 homeless residents in this county, that $700,000 a unit becomes a $7 billion challenge. And we have been, with the county of Santa Clara, trying to push mightily this rock up a $7 billion hill for more than a decade and a half. And I think when Assemblymember Ash Colorado and I were back on the city council as council members back in 2008, I introduced a measure he was strongly supporting to make San Jose the largest city in the country with a citywide inclusionary housing policy. And after a half decade of battling in the courts, the Supreme Court, we finally got that implemented. And the county stepped up, and I think Supervisor Mike Wasserman may be joining us shortly. And we're grateful that they stepped up in a big way in 2016 with $1 billion bond measure. And in March, city voters approved here in the city of San Jose another more than $1 billion over the next 20 years through Measure E. And just last month, as Councilmember Dev Davis is here, she pushed hard with the rest of us to cast a deciding vote to approve a citywide commercial impact fee for affordable housing. So we've been trying a lot of different ways to find the dollars, but the reality is we know all these dollars and all these efforts won't be enough. And we've got to do something as we're pushing this rock up a $7 billion hill to either get a smaller rock or flatten the hill. And so we're trying to think differently about this challenge. And these three projects offer us an alternative. And we're going to need a lot of alternatives. We're going to need a lot of tools in this toolbox to combat homelessness. And so we are constructing these three developments, serving more than 300 residents, not in 4 or 5 years, but in 4 or 5 months. And they're costing not $700,000 per apartment, but about $85,000 per apartment unit. And we're doing this because of the leadership of Governor Gavin Newsom and his team and the legislature in the state of California. I'm proud to have Assemblymember Ash Kalra here. And we are creating this desperately needed alternative to expand the many tools we'll need in our toolkit to build a California for all. So together we've done so with 3 basic ingredients: hustle, teamwork, and leadership. I want to tell you briefly about the hustle because there's a lot of folks here who are involved in that hustle. As the pandemic set in, we had both a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge was to comply with statewide health orders that we had to thin out our shelters and thin out the encampments because we knew that homeless people would be particularly vulnerable in this pandemic. The opportunity was that because of Governor Newsom's leadership, we had a way to clear a lot of red tape and to move more quickly and with some help.
All right, you're watching this live I'm sorry, it's not live. It's from earlier today out of the Bay Area in California, but we want to take a quick commercial break. Some of you will see that 2-minute commercial break, others will not, but bear with us here.
You guys move fast enough. And he and City Manager Dave Sykes said absolutely, no question about it. And he did what all great leaders do. He assembled an amazing team, and they went right to it. And Jim, sadly, is retiring from the city in a couple months after 31 years of service, but I think this is one of his many capstones he can look at with great pride. But the team that he assembled, I know Jackie Morales-Ferrand, our housing director, and Reagan Henniger, our deputy housing director, have been pushing like crazy here in this city, and they took on this challenge immediately. James Stagey, who's really been deeply involved in these 3 projects and managing the effort from the housing side. Great partnership with our public works team led by Matt Cano, and I just want to briefly describe project manager here is Brian Lee. Katie Martin was a project manager at Evans Lane, and Chris Master de Casa is a project manager at Rue Ferrari. These 3 projects all pushed through with the great work of our public works team, as well as Rodney Rabson, Mike O'Connell, Paul Garcia. And I really want to give a big shout out to Mackenzie Mossing and Nathan Ho on my team, who have been amazing champions, pushing and nudging every possible way to get these projects to move forward. Everyone hustled hard. So there was a lot of hustle, certainly at the city of San Jose, but we were able to hustle because we had great partners, and the teamwork came from a lot of different sources. I see here John Ball and Mike Block. Now these 2 guys just volunteered their time with us for several weeks, several months I should say, on weekly calls, and they were looking at all kinds of different housing types and looked at sites. John is a retired executive at Hensel Phelps, who somehow or another keeps getting sucked into these city projects. No matter how much he tries to get away from us, he somehow volunteers. Mike Block is still running the show over at Block Construction. It was just great having private sector helping us understand how we could do this cost effectively and at the speed we needed to. Thank you, gentlemen, for stepping up. We of course had amazing partners managing this effort at Home First. I really want to thank Andrea Urton and Renee Ramirez. I think I saw Andrea a minute ago. Where'd she go? There's Andrea. Thank you so much. Your team is on site, managing incredibly well here and at, I believe, Rue Ferrari. We're grateful for all that Home First has been doing in our community for decades, because we know management makes the project work. And of course, running the construction is a whole nother battle. And we had amazing leadership from our partners at Habitat for Humanity, who also have led the construction. Yeah, let's clap for them. Who also led the construction of our tiny homes. And so, you know, it's really because of Janice Jensen's leadership that they've really expanded their mission. They're not just about getting a bunch of amateurs like me out with a hammer, although they'll do that on occasion. They're actually managing professional projects like this and helping us really scale our efforts in the battle against homelessness. And I'm just so grateful to Andrea and to Renee Ramirez. I'm sorry, forgive me, Kevin Elliott. Kevin Elliott, the Director of Development, who I know is also here. I just ran into Kevin. Thank you very much, Kevin, for all that you do. And they have been amazing, so thank you very much. And of course, we have other management partners on another site, and we'll hear more about that in a few weeks, Path and Abode, who have been longstanding partners with us here at the city. So I mentioned it took teamwork, it took hustle, finally it took leadership. I just need to acknowledge local leadership here that made this happen. We have 3 different sites in 2 different council districts. One of those council districts is represented by Dev Davis. And I have been with Dev Davis when she has been in front of 300 very angry community members. They yell because they love, I know. And she has stood up repeatedly and said, we're going to do this because this is the right thing to do. And that is not easy. And I'm not sure if you brought Charlotte and Dominic. Did you? Here, yeah. Oh, okay. So, yeah, Charlotte, where'd they go? Oh, there they are. They're in the back hiding. Okay, well, I know your mom always tells me how proud she is of you. You should be proud of her, too. She's doing great work. And I also want to really thank Councilmember Sergio Jimenez, who I believe is represented by Vanessa Sandoval. Hey, Vanessa, thank you. And has been working really hard here with the surrounding neighborhoods to ensure we have a good neighbor relationship between neighborhoods and residents here. I really appreciate all they've done to step up. Finally, in leadership, we're going to talk about the governor in a second, but I got to give big kudos to Assemblymember Ash Kalra, who's been an enormous champion for affordable housing in our region and now statewide for many years. He was particularly instrumental here because he authored a bill in 2019, AB 1745. Don't worry, there'll be a test on this tomorrow. They extended the sunset on a bill that we really benefited enormously that was passed back in 2016 that helps us get around some of the red tape on the building codes. All these units are safe. It just so happens we're able to do this a lot more cost effectively because of the help that Assemblymember Kalra gave it to us. And I want to thank him for all his leadership and invite him to the podium. Thank you, Assemblymember. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, for your leadership, for that very kind introduction. I'm incredibly excited to be here. I've lived in this part of San Jose, in this community, for 42 years. And so it's so meaningful and personal to me that we can provide shelter, provide a warm place, a loving place for so many of our unhoused brothers and sisters. And while this pandemic has only exacerbated economic challenges faced by so many Californians, homelessness has been a persistent problem across our state that we're still trying to fix, pre-pandemic and certainly now during the pandemic. And that's why last year, as the mayor referenced, I authored Assembly Bill 1745 with support and partnership from the mayor and city of San Jose to extend the timeline for the city of San Jose to build life-saving, which it is, life-saving emergency housing for those in need. And we're all grateful that AB 1745 was signed into law by Governor Newsom and with the work of his team, with his continued commitment to house everyone in the state of California. And we obviously had a lot of help, as mentioned by the mayor, from Habitat for Humanity, East Bay, Silicon Valley, who have been able to provide these 78 units of emergency housing to vulnerable residents, especially those impacted by the pandemic. And not too far, the Rue Ferrari site, also in my district here in South San Jose, over 100 more units will be coming online very, very soon. So San Jose is showing that we can do it, that it is possible to take on one of the biggest crises of our lifetime. And what we see here today was made possible through the governor's leadership and through the shared vision of a better, more secure and compassionate future for unhoused Californians. And so I proudly stand here with Governor Newsom, Mayor Liccardo, and so many of the partners that I think the mayor almost introduced everyone here, so I'll do a ditto for that. As we celebrate today's progress, we also reaffirm our commitment to continuing the work towards eradicating homelessness and ensuring safe shelter for the most vulnerable members of our communities. And in the midst of this crisis, we are taking the opportunity to forge ahead to fund projects throughout our state and certainly here in this city. And it's been made possible because of joint leadership, which we see demonstrated today because of everyone here, to seize upon the opportunity, which I'm so grateful for. Together, we must continue to build upon this foundation and ensure our unhoused neighbors are not left behind, that they are embraced and given the dignity that they deserve, and that our actions represent the moral principle that housing is a human right. And so again, Governor, I cannot thank you enough for your commitment to end homelessness in our great state. And Mayor Liccardo, Councilmember Davis, Councilor Jimenez, and the rest of the city leadership, thank you for your leadership. Thank you. When I'm in Sacramento talking the game, you're actually walking the walk here, and that makes me so, so proud. So thank you, Mayor Liccardo.
Thank you, Thank you, Assemblymember. Now, it's really a tremendous honor of mine to introduce Sandy. Sandy is here with her friend Bubbles. And Sandy is going to offer...
All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break. Some of you will see this. It's about 2 minutes long from our advertising partners. Others will not see this, but keep it right here on NewsNOW from Fox. Thank you so much.
Sexual assault. She has continued to be able to forge ahead in ways I think many of us probably can't comprehend. She was last living in a place where they wouldn't allow dogs. And so we're thrilled that we could provide a home for Sandy and for Bubbles. We got a dog run here, by the way. And now her son and her granddaughter can visit her every week here. Thank you, Sandy, for joining us, and thank you for courageously sharing your story.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a little hard, but for me to do. I've been homeless for 6 years, and I've been advocating for myself for apartments. Those 6 years, I have applications all over. I was at one place that it was an independent place where you pay, and I got raped and sodomized for 2 days without stop. I finally got out, was able to get out of his way and just run. And I've had a lot of bad experience at shelters. And when they told me about this when I was at the motel, when I left with the dog, and they didn't want the dog, I packed up and left. That was a life moves. Because she wanted him out and I couldn't get him back. I couldn't get her back because she was a puppy. After she had signed all the papers and blah, 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 okay? She gave me 2 hours to give her Bubbles so she could take it to Milpitas shelter. And I told her no. If she leaves, I leave. So I've been paying motels back and forth. Little bit of earnings I had, gone, until they called me. I made a lot of calls, and they came from the county. And one of them was Debbie, and she told me she was gonna move me to little houses, tiny houses. And I said, oh no, because I've seen that on my phone. That looks like a little hole. It looks like a jail. I've never been to jail, but that looks like a jail, you know? And when I came here, I was so amazed, not only of the place, but the people here. The people here are fantastic, from the guards all the way to the staff and the caseworkers. I have a marvelous caseworker that he knows me since before, which is Quentin. Can you go around? Okay. They accepted my dog here. She has all the papers and everything. I feel like I'm home. Okay, I feel like I'm home. And I want to thank you, the governor, the mayor, the city, the county, for doing a project like this for us. Because this has been the greatest thing that ever happened to me in all those years. I appreciate that the governor and the mayor has the heart to know what homeless go through, and this was made up for us. And I really appreciate it with all my heart, because I feel safe here. I feel safe here. I have been molested in at two places, shelters, and my heart goes out for you guys, because you guys are doing a great job, a fantastic job. That we were being treated like people, okay? Not a statistic, but like real people. And I have to thank everyone here. The only thing, we need a bus stop. Okay? We need a bus stop. That's the only thing. But otherwise, everything's well here. Everything's well here. The whole staff, everyone. I have no complaints whatsoever. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Sandy, thank you. Thank you for sharing your account. And you can be sure Mackenzie was taking notes back here about the bus stop. So I want to finally introduce our another very important honored guest. That is Governor Gavin Newsom. I'm with a group of 13 mayors throughout the state who occasionally nudge and needle the governor about whatever we might happen to want. About 90% of the time it has to do with homelessness. And we've had several conversations, and as a former mayor, I think the governor clearly gets it. He has always accepted our desire to meet, and he has always engaged us honestly and forthrightly. And I should also say he's ably served by Jason Elliott, who leads his homelessness efforts. And I knew I liked Jason the minute he told me that he grew up here in the Bay Area, and he was a fan of what we call affectionately the Greater Giants, the San Jose Giants. Yes. So we knew we'd hit it off, and Jason's done amazing work in leading several initiatives. So we've been in constant conversation with the governor and his team and Jason. And over the last year, what we have seen coming from the governor's office has been transformative and was directly responsible for what you see today. It was the governor creating the Homeless Housing Assistance Program, or HAP, that enabled us to be able to have $17 million that we could use to build these 3 projects. That was essential. It was his executive order that made Caltrans land available that we're using for one of these 3 projects, and we'll be using for others as well. It was his executive order granting CEQA waivers that helped get a lot of red tape out of the way, so we could move quickly and get this built in 4 or 5 months rather than 4 or 5 years. In every step, the governor has been an amazing partner and leader. He walks the walk, and I am so grateful that he is our governor. Governor Gavin Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, thank you all very much for the privilege and opportunity to come down here and brag on Sam and his team and the City Council. and others that made this project possible. I thank Jim for his leadership and all of you for being out here and being part of this remarkable moment, which is a moment that proves a paradigm that we can solve this issue. Those that are cynical, those that are filled with doubt, I would encourage them just to consider what Mayor Liccardo has done in just 4 months. The idea that in 4 months we could take pen to paper, we can organize a construct statewide, local, using federal money, building out capacity with local public partnerships, be it private sector partners or nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity, Home First, and others, to get volunteers, to get everybody together. And within just 120 days, to create opportunities, 307 units in just 120 or so days, to help people like Sandy and to help hundreds of others that are struggling episodically, struggling more chronically with the conditions and challenges of homelessness. At the end of the day, this is not about 307 static units for 307 people in perpetuity. This is about creating opportunities for people to transition. And so it's a paradigm that's absolutely true, a paradigm that the mayor advanced, that the solution to the homeless challenge is housing, but it's housing and supportive services. It is the case management. It is the individuals that are committed to helping address some of the underlying reasons why people are out in the streets and the sidewalks, or bouncing around different couches or shelters, or we're out in their cars or in creeks and sidewalks and underpasses throughout this state. Getting under the hood, literally and figuratively, to understand those conditions so we can address those conditions with a mindset of getting people back on their feet, getting them back on their way, back into the journey to be fully expressive in their lives and self-sufficient. And so it's in that spirit that I'm here, of deep gratitude, deep respect for the hustle. A mayor that uses the word hustle, just that alone should elevate Sam, though he is already the president of that damn 13 mayors, so he can't even be. I don't know what more I can say, but I just have deep respect for his leadership, not an abstract concept, a very practical concept and construct. It is demonstrable, that leadership at scale here today. This was nothing more than, sort of a hybrid open space parking lot storage facility, and look at it here today with the faces of those lives that have been improved, and dozens of others that will be moving into these units over the course of the next days and coming weeks. So again, thank you to Mayor Liccardo. Thank you to Councilmember Davis. Thank you, by the way, Councilmember, for stepping up and having the courage of your convictions. Thank you for doing what's right, even if folks are out there saying it's not particularly popular, because at the end of the day, we need more people like you, less people that are willing just to float along and point fingers and say it's someone else's responsibility and that they're somehow not accountable. That's leadership as well. And so I just admire that, and I want you to know we have your back, and whatever you need to be supported as you make the case that we're all in this together, that there's no leak on your side of our boat, that we have a responsibility, a moral responsibility as human beings, as members of this larger community, the Commonwealth, to help other individuals, and not say that's for someone else on the other side of the tracks or the road, or in a different county, for that matter, a different part of the state. I just admire that, and I don't see a lot of that. Not everybody does that. A lot of folks find excuses. They don't show up because it's hard. It's hard work. And so anyway, I don't want to keep bragging on you, but I want to recognize you because it's what we need. The reason we have a damn crisis is we don't have enough people like Councilmember Davis. We don't have enough mayors like Sam Liccardo. It's the reason we have a crisis of homelessness in this state, because no one had the guts, the courage to take responsibility and ownership. And for years and years and years, for decades, it festered. And then all of a sudden people say, well, now the place is unlivable. Can't take it anymore. Well, at the end of the day, we can resolve to fix this with that hustle, that grit, with that determination, with that leadership, and with intentionality. And I just want to express gratitude as well to Assemblymember Carla for his intentionality, for recognizing it's one thing to have an idea another even have money to support the idea. It's another have the resources, human and otherwise, to get it done. But sometimes you need to streamline your regulatory process in order to drive to goal and get something done on time and under budget. And so I want to just thank you for recognizing that, working with your colleagues. A lot of colleagues up in Sacramento, a lot of folks. Not easy on these issues, and to drive and streamline, as you did with the CEQA legislation this year, where we were able now to drive a lot of projects for the second reason I'm here, and that is to announce an additional $200 million that we are contributing in this state through our Home Key partnership, which is not insignificant. And what I think makes all of us so enthusiastic about that is, again, the hustle that's behind this program. We started just in April. Just think about this. 6 months ago, we started a project called Project Home Key in the state of California. 22,203 individuals. 22,203 individuals have been served by Project Room Key just in 6 months. In July, because of Ash's leadership and his colleagues, we started a new program called Home Key. We were able to work together, identify $600 million, despite a
All right, I want to apologize there. That event just went to black, and we don't know why. But you were listening to California Governor Gavin Newsom from earlier today talk about Project Home Key, especially up there in the Bay Area where the homelessness problem has really gotten out of control, and they, state officials, refurbish old hotels, motels, apartment complexes into housing for homeless people in the state of California. We want to switch gears here now and take you over to an event that happened earlier today in Wisconsin. You'll remember that case that we covered here on NewsNOW from Fox about Alvin Cole, that 17-year-old African-American male who was shot to death by an African-American police officer in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, back in February. You'll remember we covered that here on NewsNOW from Fox, and that officer was not charged with the murder of Alvin Cole. So we want to just play you out now a press conference that the attorneys for Alvin Cole's family and his family members held earlier today in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. Let's take a listen.
Citizens who were affected during that time period in Wauwatosa. So if you guys don't mind coming up, please. We can just all come up together. So I don't want this to be about me talking, but I think we heard reports about how there weren't phones taken. There were phones taken. Talivia Cole's property has still been taken. We've heard reports about people not being hurt. There are people standing up here that were hurt as a result of the protests, and I want them to talk a little bit about their stories. We know that there were protesters who were arrested, questioned when they asked for a lawyer. They were questioned when they said they didn't want to answer any questions anymore, and then they were stopped and taken to indiscriminate parts of Milwaukee County without transportation, without a phone, from different law enforcement officers. So if someone wants to step up and talk, maybe Jill, why don't you start?
Hi, my name is Jill Ferguson, and I was, I call it ambushed from my car after a protest on, gosh, I can't remember the date, I think the 17th, I don't know. I was followed in my car, pulled over so that no one could see it happening, and I was immediately descended upon by a minimum of 6 different types of police vehicles. I was surrounded by a minimum of 10 law and order types, including, as I was looking around trying to get badge identification, I saw two of them that said federal agents, sheriffs, police from every department. I was asked why I was part of a terrorist organization and why I supported this movement as a obviously senior white woman. And I retorted back because I am against shooting to kill and choking to death the unarmed. And they retorted back, they were all armed. And I said, you're lying. You're lying. And I stood so strong against them. When I was taken to the police department, I was questioned by the FBI, and I refused to answer any of their questions. I was then told I'd be taken back to my vehicle, which was on 71st in Meineke. They, knowing that they had towed my car immediately upon my arrest, they didn't tell me that and say, well, we towed your car, so can you call someone to pick you up? Instead, they dropped me off on 60th and Blue Mound. So here I am, a senior lady, walking around for an hour trying to find a car that wasn't there, and they knew that. And then the next day in a news conference, they said, oh, no, we don't drop people off in other places. And then when I went to pick up my car from the towing place, I was told, I asked them specifically what time the car was towed. They said 7:38. And I said, and who requested the tow? Was it a citizen or the police department? And they said the Wauwatosa Police Department. And I have that on video as evidence that Mayor McBride and Chief Weber they're serial liars. They can't be trusted. They're telling falsehoods, and their narrative is false all the way around. To call my friends here terrorists or it's just so revolting to me. And I guess my point here is, as I stand here with all of my white privilege, I right now, 2 days after the incident, I completely fell apart the next morning after it. I cried and shook and paced for 2 days straight. My son came over and he said, Mom, if you don't call the doctor right now, I'm taking you to the emergency room. And so right now I'm being treated for post-traumatic stress disorder, medicated, and getting therapy for it. And as I look around at my friends here, I think, you know what? That's my white privilege. They have to deal with this every day. Every day. They don't have the privilege of getting post-traumatic stress disorder medication and therapy. And that's wrong. And that's why I marched, and it's why I stand with them. And my message to people who back the badge under any circumstances is that, have you considered what that does to you? If you appreciate your community services like good schools, libraries, parks, your money is going to be going to pay for lawyers' fees for the police aggression and the violence and the brutality, for the settlements that occur. Just like Breonna Taylor family got $12 million. That's where your tax dollars are going to go. So keep back in the blue, because it's going to cost you in what you currently have the privilege of enjoying. So I guess that's all I have to say. I think that what this needs to be is a teaching moment for all families. Instead of, there's no side to pick here. It's right or it's wrong. And the profiling of people of color, people of different genders, it's wrong. It's wrong. We all have equal protection under the law, under constitutional law and under God's law. We are all equal.
My name is Joanna. I was arrested in Wauwatosa on October 9th at about 6:30 p.m. before the curfew that was instated. I was held in a van, handcuffed behind Wauwatosa City Hall for 4 hours, and watched as the police officers arrested other individuals who are citizens who are not participating in any protests, were not violent, were returning home from work. Their cars were damaged, people were sent to the hospital, and they were brought with me to the police station by the police for no reason. After we were detained, they told us they would drop us off at home, then later told us they would not be able to drop us off at home. They dropped us off at 35th and Kilbourne. They took all of our phones. They did not allow us to make a phone call after we asked to ensure that someone could meet us there to pick us up. So myself and the 6 other people that were arrested that night, over the course of the night, were just left to wander the streets with no phone, no contact, and no other possessions. The Wauwatosa Police Department said that they had my phone and they were searching it for evidence, but I was never told why. I was not charged with any crime. I just received a citation for violating an emergency order, which I did not do as I was arrested before curfew. And they kept my phone for 6 days, and I got very different answers each time I tried to get it back about why I was being held and what they were doing with it. And I would just like to say that it was encouraging, and it is encouraging to see how many people are motivated and upset by the arrests of the people, the citizens, the protesters, but people should have been more outraged before by the murders of Alvin Cole, Antonio Gonzalez, and Jay Anderson. And if you are interested in working to commit to working for these things, commit to the demands that Kimberly Motley has released to Mayor McBride, and in addition, commit to demands of community control of the police in the form of a Civilian Police Accountability Council, or CPAC. Please join and support the Milwaukee Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. We're not going away after this is over, and we'll continue to fight for this.
Thank you.
My story is similar to Joanna's. I think she hit the nail on the coffin there. I was also arrested on October 9th when I was with a group of people, and we were asked to disperse Wauwatosa, and we did disperse Wauwatosa, and were arrested in Milwaukee County. While I was being arrested, I witnessed an elderly couple get abused by the Wauwatosa Police Department and thrown on the ground and arrested as well. And that was really difficult to witness. In addition to that, we waited for hours. Our group was separated. Some of us were brought to an unusual location for an arrest. And then in the end, we were also, hours later, also all dropped off. I was dropped off on 2nd and Locust with a group of people, and our cars were on 30th and Center or 70th and North. We were not received a phone call. We didn't want to be dropped off there. It's just not normal protocol, and we didn't have any money or any phone. And I was lied to and told my phone would not be taken, and that the Wauwatosa Police Department was not taking any cell phones, and whoever told me that was lying. But then I experienced it myself. So I just want to say that the Wauwatosa Police Department does not, nobody should be okay with how they're treating citizens. It just isn't morally just. We're here for the right reasons, for human lives. And there should be, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not guilty of anything.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I think it should be noted, too, that all the protesters that have been arrested, there's no acts of violence. These have been peaceful protests in Wauwatosa continuously. The acts of violence, anybody that's been hurt this whole time, it's been from the police department, injuring people. I think every time I hear Tracy Cole's story, it's like brings tears to my eyes. She was hit in the face multiple times as she was dragged out and her arm was broken. These are all peaceful people, and why we have this escalation of violence from Wauwatosa Police Department, we don't see it in Milwaukee anymore, but we're still seeing it in Wauwatosa. I think there's a lot of question marks there. I think that's all I have to say.
Hello, my name is Tracy Cole, and basically my family was targeted. We was on our way home, And when police had those spikes in front of our cars, me and my daughter was in one car, my other two daughters was in the other car. They throw spikes in front of our cars and basically just start ambushing us. They grabbed my Tristiana out the car. They had a gun pointed to my daughter, Talibia Cole. They twisted my daughter's arm, Tristiana, and throw them into the ground, grabbing their phones. And with me, they had grabbed my other daughter out the driver's side of her car. Once they grabbed her out the car, they came around to me. And they told me to get out the car, yelling and screaming, open up this damn door. And I opened up the door, and they pulled my hair out the car, literally pulled my hair. And then I'm telling them, like, I'm Alvin Cole's mother, Tracy Cole. I addressed them numerous times who I am. Next thing you know, they said, I don't give a damn who you is. 5 cops jumped me, started pounding me in the head with their fists and billy clubs. Once I felt those hard punches to me, I began to get dizzy and I passed out for a minute. And they literally got me on the ground and started putting their knees into my back. And they was trying to get to my neck, but I kept on moving my neck so they won't get to my neck. And all the stuff that I've been through, I ain't never experienced in my life. I ain't never got arrested by any police officer. I never been handcuffed. But today I'm scared. I'm scared. I'm scared of cops. I'm frightened to walk my house. I can't sleep no more. I be up, walking, pacing the floors. It's enough I haven't grieved my son's death. But by trying to grieve my son's death, I'm still trying to fight and try to stand up and receive, justice for my son. And Wauwatosa said that no one was hurt during the protest. I was hurt. I was beaten. I have 2 blackened eyes. I have this bump on my forehead. It went down. They twisted my arm and bruised my arm real bad. I went to my doctor. My doctor said, I will never be the same because it's a hurting situation. They said I probably got postpartum depression. I never had this, all because they said nothing happened to no protesters. We need to seek justice. I'm not just seeking justice for my son, Alvin Cole. I'm seeking justice for everyone, for Antonio Gonzalez and Jay Anderson family. No one should experience this brutal attack against me as a woman, me being touched by male cops, touching me and say, touching my body and say that I guess they call it frisking to see if you have any weapons. I felt violated. I felt my rights was taken from me and stripped from me. So when is we going to seek justice? When is we going to open up our eyes? When is we going to say enough is enough? Because if it was my son, Alvin, it could be any one of y'all kids being at the wrong place at the wrong time. Thank you.
My name is John Larry. I am a resident of Wauwatosa, and I've been out marching for justice with the individuals that you see behind me, and then some that are standing in front of me that you are not able to see. All of this that has occurred, it didn't have to, but it did, because Wauwatosa currently has ineffective and inefficient leadership. In the last press conference that was held by Mayor McBride, along with Chief Weber, you heard them speak in regards to the protests that occurred. I was heavily disappointed at what I heard as I listened to some, not all, of the press conference. My name was mentioned by both the mayor and Chief Weber because of an incident that happened on August 14th, 2020, where one of the lieutenants, Lieutenant Jeffrey Farina, put his hands on several young women. And me seeing that from my household, I left to go down and speak with Lieutenant Farina. Things were tense. Actions were taken from the police to protesters. Words were exchanged, both polite and impolite. And the Wauwatosa Police Department decided to come after me first by visiting my home, crossing over my lawn, and issuing me a citation for a bit over $1,300 that could have been mailed to me. It was an act of intimidation. But again, all of this is happening under poor leadership. Poor leadership. If we had effective leadership, if we had leadership that really believed in a better Tosa, individuals from the protests perhaps would have come together with the police, with the mayor, to talk about how do we move forward and how do we change Wauwatosa so that it is a better Wauwatosa. But instead of doing that, Wauwatosa became a war zone. It became a war zone, again, because of the ineffective leadership that is in City Hall, that sits in the seat of the mayor, as well as the chief of police. Neither of those two individuals, from my understanding or from what I've seen, have ever stepped grounds on the streets of Wauwatosa during those times where protesters were being manhandled and abused by the Wauwatosa Police Department. Instead, they sat back in their homes and allowed other police officers under the direction of Lieutenant Jeffrey Farina to attack us. Armed police officers in rioter gear, with guns, with tasers, with guns that were
All right, you're watching out of Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, a press conference from family members, attorneys, supporters of Alvin Cole's family. Alvin Cole was murdered in February by a police officer there in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. For those of you watching, we're going to want to take a quick commercial break, about a 2-minute advertisement break. Some of you will see it, some of you won't, but stand by, and thanks for watching News Now from Fox.
It's disgusting. It's disgusting. And I'm ashamed to be a Wauwatosa resident at this moment. But at the same time, I'm becoming more and more optimistic, believing that we can become a better Wauwatosa. But I am convinced that the only way that we will become a better Wauwatosa is that through the mayor resigning immediately, through Chief Weber resigning immediately, and through Officer Joseph Mensah being fired immediately. That is the only way that Wauwatosa will become a better Wauwatosa. Mayor McBride, resign. Chief Weber, resign. Officer Joseph Mensah, to our Wauwatosa Fire and Police Commission, he needs to be fired immediately. Because I am Alvin Cole, I am Jay Anderson Jr., and I am Antonio Gonzalez. At any moment, under the leadership of Mayor McBride and under the leadership of Chief Weber, I could become a victim just like those 3 young black and brown men became. Thank you.
I also have something else I'd like to point out, and from what we've witnessed in the film and from the testimonies of people, lives are vital. They're not virtual. And police are playing, you know, it's like they're playing video games or paintball or laser tag. These are lives. And the other thing I have to say is, what lesson does this teach the children of Wauwatosa about police? You think they're going to grow up and call the police if they need help or if they feel in harm's way? This is what they're seeing. What happened to this medal? What happened to Officer Friendly? This is an opportunity for all to stand up and say enough. Absolutely enough. Lives are vital, not virtual.
What was it like seeing that video play out?
Oh my gosh, it's horrendous. It's horrendous. You know, I took medication before I came, and when I stepped into this space, I had to take more. This is unconscionable. You view this and you say, what country is this in? I'm 67. This is what my kids colored. This was their coloring books. It's not what we're seeing anymore. Racism kills. And if you think that people can just be silent for hundreds and hundreds of years being the targets of racism, I'm here to tell you racism kills, and then it strikes back when you don't listen or do anything. So I have a lot more to say, but that's all I'm going to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you guys have any questions for anybody? For me?
On the legal process, yes. Everyone said they had different experiences with being arrested and property taken, cars being either sold or left in place. What should the process have been? How should it have played out?
Well, first of all, there should have never been a curfew in the first place. I question why did Mayor McBride find it necessary to have the curfew in place, and also why they felt it necessary to call for the National Guard nearly a week before the decision with regards to Alvin Cole was made. So that's a problem. I think we saw an article, I think, Evan, you wrote an article in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel where there were people in Wauwatosa's Common Council who weren't even aware of the plan. That's a problem. Wauwatosa is not an authoritarian regime, okay? There are supposed to be people that are involved in that decision-making process that were not involved in that decision-making process. And because of that, I think you have these video images that are videos that will exist in Wauwatosa's history forever. Forever. So I know people are lawyering up. I know that there are lawyers out there writing petitions, gathering evidence, things like that. And Wauwatosa has significantly increased its legal liabilities, and I believe they've also significantly increased the legal liabilities of those other police agencies that partnered with them that night that may not have been well informed about the situation. And so because of that, we have put in mutual open records requests, which I'm sure they'll delay, but we are trying to get more information on that. Any other questions? So I want to close real quick on sort of our press statement so that we know going forward what are we asking for, and especially as it relates to the 3 families. So in response to the meeting with Mayor McBride on October 21st, and on behalf of Reverend Jesse Jackson, Bishop Grant, the Rainbow Push Coalition, and the families of Alvin Cole, Jay Anderson Jr., and Antonio Gonzalez, we ask the mayor to immediately respond to the below demands and concerns of all families and the community expeditiously. We ask for your commitment to the below objectives, and all of these objectives can be met today. All of these objectives are legal objectives that Wauwatosa could do today if they want to. Number one, Mayor McBride to direct the Police and Fire Commission to demote Chief Weber immediately for his failed leadership, particularly in supervising Officer Joseph Mensah, enabling a culture of police violence against peaceful protesters, and increasing potential legal liabilities against Wauwatosa taxpayers. Number two, a date certain for body cameras for all Wauwatosa police officers. Number three, dismiss any and all tickets as it relates to any nonviolent peaceful protests, starting with Talavia Cole. Number four, return any and all property such as phones, cameras, etc. to activists, lawyers, journalists, elderly persons, Wauwatosa residents, Wisconsin residents, U.S. citizens, non-citizens, whoever, to any and all the citizens, starting with the return of Talavia Cole's phone, which has been illegally searched and seized by the Wauwatosa Police Department. As of today, we still do not have Talavia Cole's phone. As of today, as far as I know, they still don't have a search warrant for her phone. As of today, we know that her phone has been tampered with while it's been in possession of the Wauwatosa Police Department. And we have filed a suit in the court system. Number five, Mayor McBride to direct Chief Weber to fire Officer Mensah, which he can legally do and can legally happen today. We ask that the Mayor McBride direct Chief Weber to fire Officer Mensah for his repeated violations of the Wauwatosa police rules since he has been on suspended leave from July 15th onward. Chief Weber, in a deposition of September 21st, admitted that Officer Mensah, while he's been on suspended leave, has continued to violate Wauwatosa Police Department rules. Mayor McBride. 6, develop strategies within the Wauwatosa Police Department to deal with nonviolent mental health calls to the police, and those should be handled by mental health professionals. 7, there should be a public apology from the Wauwatosa Police Department for targeting, attacking, and arresting Tracy Cole and her 3 daughters. And lastly, renaming of Madison Park to J. Anderson Jr. Park. Thank you. Well, that's a really good question. What am I concerned about the phones? So let me just share something real quick. Since there's been peaceful protests in Wauwatosa, there have been nearly 100 tickets given to different peaceful protesters. While the protesting and civil rights tickets have gone up, traffic tickets have gone down. A lot of that is as it relates to COVID. But I am concerned whether or not they're trying to, use these tickets to get revenue. I don't know. I'm very suspicious about phones. If you don't have a search warrant, and if you don't have people's consent to search their phones, that's a constitutional violation, and that's illegal. Point blank, period. And so there has been significant concerns about Wauwatosa surveying different members, different activists in the community, different journalists in the community, different lawyers in the community, things like that. And so we do know that with regards to Talavia's phone, her phone for a fact has been tampered with while it's been in the possession of Wauwatosa Police Department. Her social media has disappeared while it's been in the possession of the Wauwatosa Police Department. That is illegal. We still don't have an answer for that. And so I think it's important to note and to stress how significantly vulnerable the Wauwatosa Police Department is making their taxpayers, because there are many lawyers who are very excited of all the civil rights and constitutional violations that Wauwatosa has been imposing on people. Just because you don't agree with a person's stance, it does not give the Wauwatosa Police Department, under the failed leadership of Chief Weber, to target, harass, and attack nonviolent, peaceful protesters. Right. So I think one thing that's interesting is with the city of Wauwatosa, the Common Council meetings are virtual, the Fire and Police Commission meetings are virtual. Mayor McBride and Chief Weber did their little press conference, which is pretty much the only time I really see the chief is when he has a press conference, because certainly during protests I haven't seen him. You don't see him in those videos. Those things are virtual, but court is in person. And so when we went to court on Wednesday, we were told that those court dates, which have to be in person for non-criminal matters, have been moved to November 11th and 12th. And so the tickets range. The vast majority of people that I've seen receive tickets are in the amount of $1,321 per ticket. If the city of Wauwatosa believes that people were committing crimes, why don't they refer it to the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office? Maybe they're worried about it being thrown out. But no, they want to keep it under their umbrella. So, like I said, the vast majority of tickets, I think everyone can say, tickets $1,321 per ticket. Any other questions?
Do you have concerns that some of the issues about surveillance and harassment involving the Tosa police may predate even the protests over the months? Do you have a concern that some of these practices may have been being used for other situations before that are less reported?
I think what's shocking is we have seen how, unfortunately, some members in the Wauwatosa Police Department are behaving when there's cameras on them, when there's plenty of witnesses, when there's light being shown on them. So if this is how they're behaving when people are watching them, what happens when people aren't watching them? So absolutely we have concerns about the surveillance and questionable police tactics prior to the curfew being enacted. We have questions about, the police chief himself has said that he would keep Officer Joseph Mensah on the force. Someone who he has said has violated rules. Someone who has been determined to be not credible by the Police and Fire Commission investigator. The police chief wants to keep a non-credible officer that was determined in the report of the investigator, and someone who has violated the chief's rules on the force. It doesn't make any sense. In reading the report, within that report and during his interview with the investigator, he talked about how he fired an officer because he was late to work. And he can't figure out how to fire Officer Joseph Mensah for killing and shooting 3 people, 19 shots fired in less than 5 years time period. It's a problem. Surveillance is a problem. The disregard of constitutional rights is a problem. And the fact that they are, to a certain extent, are putting their thumb in the eye of the Wauwatosa taxpayers and don't care about their legal liabilities, we'll see when the taxpayers have to pay up on some of these things. Thank you. If you guys want that video, that can be made available to you in the press.
All right, you've been watching a press conference from earlier today out of Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, where friends and family of 17-year-old Alvin Cole were speaking to the media. Alvin Cole was shot and killed by a Wauwatosa police officer back in February. Just a couple of weeks ago, prosecutors and a grand jury declined to issue charges against that officer. He still is employed by the Wauwatosa Police Department, and he had 2 prior incidents where he shot and killed two separate people and two separate incidents. So this was his third incident like this, and many people were outraged in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. Protesters took to the streets after that decision, and you were just hearing from representatives of Alvin Cole there from today. We want to thank everyone for watching News Now from Fox today. It was Friday, October 23rd. It's about almost 8:30 here in Phoenix, Arizona, 11:30 on the East Coast. You're taking a live look at the nation's capital, the Capitol Dome there in Washington, D.C. Obviously, the center of the political universe, with only 11 days left before November 3rd, the general election. And News Now from Fox will have live coverage on election night, all night. So please tune in to that. We're always grateful for everyone watching, wherever you're watching. I'm Andrew Kraft. We want to say good night, and you'll be seeing some of our previously recorded content that we showed you throughout the day all weekend here on News Now from Fox. Thanks.
Pennsylvania! Wow. That's what I'm talking about. To Congressman Kelly, Congressman Thompson, Congressman Rentschler, all of my fellow Americans from near and far, it is great to be in a state where you refuse to lose, the Keystone State.